Hi, I'm Matthew Cheung, and I'm the founder of Work In Fintech. I'm also CEO of a fintech called ipushpull and former COO of another fintech called New Squawk. And what I want to do in these episodes is teach you all about fintech. Today, we're joined by Work In Fintech founding member Daniel Taiwo, who is a recent Masters in Finance graduate from Lancaster University. And we're delighted to welcome Neil Weatherall, who's head of technical sales at a fast-growing capital markets fintech and also former head of trading at two leading investment banks. So before we jump into the interview, Neil, can you please introduce yourself and give us a bit of background to yourself and career?
Hi, my name's Neil Weatherall. I work for ipushpull. My career history is that I went to University of Warwick to study management science. I then went straight into a graduate scheme at RBS, or NatWest Markets as it's now known. I worked in front office on the trading side in inflation and rates, cash and derivatives. I then moved to RBC to do the same role, and then within front office to look at balance sheet management. I then left banking and came into fintech to work for ipushpull with Matt.
Cool, thanks a lot, Neil, and thanks for joining us here on Work In Fintech. So we're going to kick off about learning about how exactly did you get into the financial world?
Okay, so I guess it's quite a traditional route. I was at school, GCSE, A-levels. I did maths, physics, further maths and business. I knew that I didn't really want to go into sort of doing maths or physics at university. So I looked at business courses and I also looked at computer science. At the time, I chose computer science and I actually started doing computer science at university. I was pretty fresh to it, and when I turned up I realised that most of the other people there actually knew what it meant and had already done some programming, and I'd had some sort of perhaps not brilliant idea of everything that it entailed. So I completed the year, but I just managed to get through it, and it was interesting, but I sort of decided it wasn't really for me. So I moved over. I'd been doing some business courses as part of it, so I moved over to their business school and did something called management science, which is basically just an umbrella course. So rather than doing economics and being 70-80% economics and econometrics, etc., I could just pretty much do whatever I wanted within the business school. So there was accounting, finance, law, stats, operations, some maths, some languages, just a real nice sort of mix of things to do. Obviously economics as well. So in terms of how I got into the financial world, I remember really distinctly being sat in a Friday afternoon lecture, 3 till 5. It was the best lecture of the week. It was business strategy. And we had a brilliant teacher from New Zealand who used to teach us about the Maoris and how they looked at teamwork and strategy. And then we also had a guy come in for a few weeks who was an ex-M&A banker from BNP Paribas. Very traditionally English, but I think BNP at some point had bought an old sort of merchant bank or something. And at the end of that, the guy I was sat next to said, this was probably sort of January of my second year, maybe somewhere January to Easter, sort of post-Christmas. The guy I sat next to said, so how many of internships have you applied for? And I turned around and said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we're doing this course. Clearly, you probably want to get into sort of finance or accounting or something like that. So typically the way you do it is you could then go and apply for a summer internship in your penultimate year, so the following summer. So that sort of gave me a nudge. I asked him how many he'd applied to, and he sort of scared me with, well, I've done 10 and I've got another 10 to do. They each take a few hours to apply for. So I didn't have very long. I went off, thought about it, and I basically chose maybe one or two firms from each sort of category. So there was investment banks, there was accountancy firms, there was consultancies, and I don't know, maybe one or other random ones. Typical sort of entry route of some phone interview, maybe some psychometric testing. I ended up getting an internship at Goldman Sachs in their operations division, so middle office. So I spent 12 weeks in the summer working in central London, living just behind the Tate Modern, walking to work. It was brilliant. That gave me a taste for it. I wanted to stay at Goldman, but I wanted to try and move into front office. That didn't happen. So then post that summer, I was obviously slightly better prepared, knew what I had to do, did the milk rounds, applied to 20 banks, got an offer from RBS NatWest. The offer came just before Christmas. It was a fairly decent offer in terms of what the role was. It was front office graduates program. It was, more money than I'd ever thought of earning ever. It also, they were asking for a certain grade that I sort of knew I could quite easily get. I was already on course to get it. And it meant that my last 5 months of uni were, I wasn't panicking that I had to get, a certain percentage to get the job. I was comfortable that if I just did everything I'd be doing, then I'd get the right grade. And then I'd joining the RBS graduate scheme in September 2002. So I think, what can you learn from that? Listen to your friends when they tell you what they're doing, and be aware that there's all these things going on. I mean, I knew that there'd been milk round presentations and people coming in and careers fairs, and I'd been to one or two, but it hadn't really clicked about the summer stuff. I think it had only clicked about the graduate roles. It hadn't clicked about all the programs that happened before.
So no, that's rather interesting. But with your experience at RBS in the graduate program, what advice would you give to graduates when joining a bank or the financial industry in the early stages of their career?
I think the first thing to say is that for me, a grad program was the ideal route into banking. I'd come from a business, accounting, economics type degree, so I had some broad concept of what went on, but it's very different to when you're actually in the office and you're doing that type of work. So the weeks or months that we spent in a classroom at the start was extremely valuable. They took us into specifics of techniques and things that you need to know. So if you come from doing a geography degree, they taught you how to do bond maths, which bond maths to me is basically the foundation of everything you do in a bank. If you work in anywhere near front office, it's just about cash flows and working out how much they're worth. So that was very valuable. It meant that no matter how much research you do, so I guess from my previous answer, you could see I'd done a little bit of research, but I hadn't done a lot. Some people knew very distinctly what areas of the bank there are and what they do and what the roles are. I was probably not as well informed. So being on a graduate scheme allowed me to see the full breadth of what they were teaching me and what they were offering me, how things interlinked, and what jobs there were and what the jobs actually, what areas there were and what the jobs actually meant. So that was just a time to sit there and soak up everything they tell you, listen to all the people that they bring in, go off, and if somebody says they're willing, follow up with them, just follow up. And people say that, having done that myself, people say that because they're willing to talk to you. And they're offering, the other reason why I do it is because I'm not the most extrovert person. And if someone says to me, you can come and talk to me, I take comfort in that and I will go and do it. And I feel confident that I can. I'm probably not going to just search out someone and go and just stand next to them and ask them something straight off unless I know they're going to be receptive. So all these opportunities that they offer you and people who want to talk to you and will, take them up. It took me a while to work out what sort of tasks I enjoy and what sort of things I like to do. So I guess when you're going into banking, there's a sort of public view, there's a high flying, high earning, exciting end. You really don't see much depiction of it apart from, I guess, trading desks and closing massive deals. There's a whole amount that goes on outside that, and they aren't necessarily the most rewarding jobs. They might not be the best paid, but because they're more publicly visible, you might be drawn to those. But there's lots of other jobs. You don't need to be doing those jobs to have a fulfilling, rewarding, remunerative career. So I think you've got to wander in and work out sort of what kind of person you are. There'd be people who came in having already, they're age 21 with spread betting accounts, and they're already doing all these schemes and know what's going on. And it's clear they should be on the trading side. And there's other people who you meet who just put you immediately at ease. You can talk to them about anything, and they're the guys who should be thinking, well, I'm a salesperson or in some sort of relationship role. So I think you need to sort of put aside preconceptions of what job you want to go into and just think about, what am I good at? Am I good at explaining things? Do I want to sit by myself, sort of work on something? Am I, always looking for the next big thing? I think that's quite important, because otherwise you might just end up in the wrong seat for you. And whilst you have opportunity earlier in your career to move around and try different things, which is good. You don't really want to have 3 rotations in jobs where you choose the wrong 3 things to move into. It's good to get variety, but also if you're not going to be a trader, we had 3 rotations, don't spend 3 rotations on a trading desk. Because when it comes to them when it comes to them choosing who wants you, you want to have been somewhere where they know you and can see what you can do, rather than taking a sort of punt on you. That's how it happened for me. I don't know if graduate schemes still work the same way, but obviously the way I viewed rotations and sort of summer internships and spring schemes, it's just an extended interview. So you're trying to make yourself look good, you're trying to look interested, you're trying to ask intelligent questions. It is an extended interview. That's how I, as someone who looked after graduates and summer interns, it's just you're giving someone the opportunity to show you over the course of weeks, so you get a better rounded impression of them, rather than the sort of half an hour interview that's just a cramming session.
You mentioned about how it took you a while to understand the tasks you like, and what helped you was talking to different people within the bank. But now it's kind of hard for a graduate, since with the whole pandemic situation, people working from home. How do you think that will affect them, or new grads going into the workplace? And what advice would you give for them to actually try and seek out people, especially the ones who are a bit introverted?
It's very hard. I mean, I can't lie. I think one of the issues is clearly lockdown, Corona first kicked in. There was an unknown timescale, and so you probably don't set up banks and organisations haven't set up procedures to deal with it, because there's this, they think maybe this will be over in a few months. I think that given where we are now, it's really on the institution to be putting in place very strong systems and tasks for their employees to make sure that the grads feel they've got these opportunities that just used to exist by virtue of being proximate to people. One of the ways of getting to know people used to be you'd buy them breakfast. So at least you'd have an opportunity to speak to somebody who may have wanted to speak to you because they wanted to get their breakfast off you. How do you as a graduate do it? I mean, just interesting questions, and having shown a little bit of prior research, just for me, I don't expect graduates, no matter what you've done, to turn up with technical questions. But if you turn up with something and say, this is something I've been thinking about, I've tried to research it, I sort of understand this bit, I don't understand this, could you help us? And, and it just shows that you've thought about the question, you've tried to sort of answer it yourself. Hopefully it's something that's relevant to that person, and they should, that's an engaging way of trying to get someone to speak to you and come back to you with good information. And that's not reliant on being extrovert or particularly sociable or pushy. You can email that type of thing, but I do think it's on the current staff and the banks to be giving people ways of communicating, not necessarily group Zoom calls, probably better for the sort of, so we used to go to lunchtime demonstrations. So they'd grab a member of staff off the desk, they'd be sat at the front in the boardroom, and then all the grads would wander in and spend half an hour at lunch listening to a day in the life of. That's probably quite a good thing. You can do that over Zoom now, and there's questions at the end. But it's not good for getting people engaged, because in a room of 30 people, you don't really want sticking your hand up and asking what might be a silly question. The onus at the minute is on the institution to help with these type of things, and to make their staff aware that there's all these new channels that they can be using to engage, and that it is really difficult for new people coming in who can't be proximate and be just sat there observing. One of the best ways of learning is literally just to sit next to someone and watch. And if they were watching me, I'd talk to them when I could, not necessarily looking at them, but I'd be like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. These things over here are happening, etc. Whereas, how would I do that now? Would I have a Zoom camera behind me facing my screens, back of my head? It's just a very different way of engaging. So I think there's probably on your side of things, there should be ways of you guys sharing what's been a success for you as well. I'm sat here as someone thinking, people might want to ask me stuff, and I'm willing to engage back. But what works for people engaging with me might not work for somebody else. So, if you and your peers have had success or failures in one way of trying to reach out to people, that's very good information to share, because this is a new situation, right? We've never been in this before. And whether that, just means email is always better because people can respond in their own time frame. Chats obviously are a bit more immediate, and people might not appreciate you chatting them, especially if you choose the wrong time, if they're on a trading desk and there's data coming out or it's busy. So I think just all that needs to be, if there's some sort of way of you sharing that between you and your peers, that's also really useful.
That sounds good, and that's very, very insightful. I just want to go into when you started specializing and you were on the trading desk. How was that role? And more specifically, how did technology help you in that role as a trader?
The way that I got my eventual job, we did 3 rotations. I didn't end up on a desk that I'd worked on, but I ended up on a new desk that was set up, sort of formed from various staff from other desks. And I'd worked with one of them as part of my rotation. And another person who was leaving to set up this desk was my mentor. So I knew him pretty well. And I'd been saying to them, this is the type of thing I want to do. And it was just a good match. So I ended up on this sort of newly formed desk that was a product in an area they'd covered before, but it was growing and they needed to sort of have a distinct team to do it rather than, just a bit of other people's time. So technology, when I started on that desk, our trades and our risk was all spreadsheet based. So there was a sort of Excel based function list and storage facility that we saved our trades in, and they had a reference, but I think you remember we could see them all on one page. So 30 rows of Excel, each of them with a sort of nice name of who it was and what we'd done. And then we had to copy in some data and hit some buttons to run some macros. So from the start, it was quite good in that Excel was familiar to me. And we had our trades in it. And then as the desk grew and as volumes grew, the systems just sort of evolved sort of exponentially, really. And we moved from being a sort of low frequency desk in terms of trades to being more towards the middle, not high frequency like maybe bond trading or interest rate swaps. But we definitely stepped up, and we stepped away from where we'd sat before. So we ended up in this middle ground between sort of exotic and structured trades and sort of very heavy flow trades. And that made things interesting, but also difficult because we were never quite sure which tech guys were supporting us. But what it did mean was we had the best of 2 worlds. We could try and steal bits of each of them. So in terms of how technology changed, I think the main things were we moved away from trades being stored in Excel into a sort of proper proprietary system. In terms of pricing trades, we moved away from having to do things manually into what we would call like a line or a row pricer, where it was distinct from Excel, but if you wanted to, you could copy from Excel into it and paste, and it would price stuff. The big growth in the number of trades we did led to a few things around book management needing to improve. So whereas our books used to run overnight, some sort of Excel-based process, they then moved into some proper system-based thing with SLAs and things that arrived in the morning and files that had to be created. So that took the pressure off the trading desk. And the other thing is, the more trades you've got, the more opportunity there is to sort of amend them and to tear them up and unwind. So we had to get much better tools around finding trades, doing something with them, processing. So there was a huge sort of growth. One of the best things that we saw was we would generally have to sort of double key things between trading and sales. So sales would look at it and then we might not trust them, so then we'd do it ourselves. But then we got a system whereby sales could do it, put it into the official system, and then ping us like a virtual message saying, these are the trades, they're attached, look at them, see what you think. And then we could communicate on this little internal system. And it would also, like, if we traded, it would inform our middle office that they should be expecting to see a confirm and a market wire. So I mean, we went from 100 trades to like 10,000. I know we had all these gradual steps along the way in terms of the technology, but they all felt quite natural. And because we were a desk that had quite a number of staff and we were making money, we had the opportunity to have tech budget, and I had the opportunity to work with the tech guys in sort of telling them what we need. And it was always sort of that was sort of a part of my job, was to cover that side. Some of the other guys were more interested in, other bits of the sort of complete desk and the role.
That's fascinating, especially how you said that the growth of technology used within finance has grown over the past years and over your career. Keeping to that point, I would want to know how you would describe fintech, because that's a word that's been thrown around recently. And me as a graduate when I was in university, and a lot of my mates don't really know what that means. So I would want to know from your perspective how you define fintech.
I mean, I might have a slightly different definition given my history. So it's technology within the financial industry that is not legacy based and is more related to the tech that you see in other industries and consumer products type things. So banking, there's a lot of legacy systems because they are, in terms of cash and money and retail banking, they need to be relied upon. And then on the investment bank side, there's probably some underinvestment over the years because the profits were just taken as profits, and to pay people and pay shareholders. There's also the consolidation of banks has meant that just a huge amount of legacy systems that need integrating. So a lot of work was always done on just trying to keep things going and keep them together. So if you think about RBS at the time, there was RBS, they bought NatWest, there was Ulster Bank, there was like the Channel Islands. So that, I think for a long time, the focus was on just making things work and not rocking the boat. Whereas fintech seems to be, well, why don't we rock the boat a bit and try and do new things and think about things a different way. And the focus in banking since like credit crisis has moved away from masters of the universe, prop trading, towards, client-based, customer-centric, all these sort of buzzwords. And that tends to mean that the level of service you give them needs to be greater and you want to make it more efficient. The other thing has been, as banking profits have fallen, focus has fallen on costs. If you can't increase revenues, then your cost is one of the major things. Where do you want to be spending money? Well, it's probably front office with all the sort of decision makers, traders, salespeople. So it's middle office, back office, admin, processing costs. And they're generally they can be manual intensive, but they're probably some of the most ripe for sort of efficiency improvements through technology. But because they're built on all these legacy systems, and they need to work, people have probably been quite reticent to look at them. But now there's a need for cost saving, and there's all this technology that can help. It's probably got the audience it needed, whereas 10 years ago it didn't, because there wasn't a focus on as much as 15 years. There wasn't as much focus on the cost side of things or, trying to improve stuff.
You said that banks used to focus on a lot of legacy systems, but now they're moving towards not using legacy systems as much. How do you see the fintech space as a whole and also within banks evolving over the next 3 to 5 years?
Fintech will not replace those legacy systems in a lot of cases, but what it may do is allow them to do the things that they're good at, and you have a different way of interacting with them. So if they're a particularly good way of storing trade data or handling the cash payments or coupons that you really don't want to interrupt with, and they do it relatively efficiently and are not going to break, then leave that. But then the stuff that you need to do for your customers and for your traders to provide them with better insight, just build something else that can have a feed into that or can communicate with it, but just leave it doing the basic tasks that it can do, if that's sensible. In terms of how fintech will change, working from home, remote communication between teams, I think is probably the area I see the biggest growth, but it's probably the hardest to get into. So like you say, like graduates not being able to sit next to somebody and just absorb what's going on, you expand that to the trading floor. The trading floors are full of hundreds of people always something to say, shouting, sharing information. Some of it, some of it just passes over your head. Some of it doesn't, just because if I think about what's happening at the minute, I imagine that the way that people have tried to replicate a dealing room is they've set up loads of calls and Zooms and chats. So then, I used to work in sterling rates. So I imagine there's a chat called like sterling rates, which is, like the main sterling sort of traders and sales. But I also used to listen a lot to when on the dollar cross currency desk and the euro desk. And I now might not, if I was sat in the office, if I was on these chats, I might not be on that one, but it was always very good to hear. And if I was put on that chat, then that chat will become huge and maybe not that useful because it's just this amorphous mess of people and ideas that you can't. So, I think people say there is just a wealth of information on a dealing floor. And the way that you used to absorb it was either you'd sort of learn how to tune in, tune out, depending on what people were talking about. You'd learn to tune in and out to specifically who you should listen to. Because there's some people who are just, don't bother. But there's some people when they do say something that they're the people you want to listen to. And you do, but then otherwise you miss stuff. So there's so much information, and the way of like slicing and dicing it now and looking at what you want to look at and filtering, that to me is going to be huge. And there was a guy at BNP who did a talk slightly about this, and he just said they're trying to take quantitative data and use it to create the sort of a feel for the market. So, you get a feel for the market by being in a room and hearing what was going on and seeing prices. And, if you're sat on your own, you might not have the same thing. So they're trying to use quantitative data and use that to sort of give people a feel for it. So, our data shows us that bid offers have been widening over the last couple of days in these products, but not these. And, that's the sort of thing you might just pick up on generally, but you can now use data to give you that. But the only way you do that is if you record it and somebody's sort of looking at it to try and use it.
There was something I read, and I just wanted to get your opinion on it in terms of you were talking about how you were working in the sterling rates, but then you'd hear other desks. Heard that the trading desk, they want to implement VR goggles so that they can replicate people actually being in the trading floor. Do you think that could actually come in play, and do you think that would solve the problem, or do you think that's not going to happen?
Quite bizarre. It's one way. I think probably a lot of people would feel quite sick if they were doing that, based on my experience of using VR goggles and Google Cardboard, where you put your phone in it. It's one way around it. I like the fact that people are thinking of these things, because I think like the proliferation of chats or Zoom calls is not the right way for me. But I don't know where we're going to end up. It's sort of VR seems a bit. I mean, it's a useful way of doing it, but again, it's much easier in a room, I think, to sort of stand up and wander over somewhere and just listen out. And I don't know, I can see it would take quite a while to sort of tune in and out. Also, some people might appreciate being at home where there's less background noise.
On the technology front, there's this invisible barrier which I think exists, where people think you need to be a developer or a coder to get into fintech. So both yourself and myself, we've been in the financial markets. However, we're now both working in a fintech. I don't have a developing or coding background yet. I'm CEO of a fintech. You also, you have some computer science background, but you're not a developer. How did you find coming into a technology company with that lack of knowledge around development and coding? Do you think that is a barrier, or do you think there's another skill set or multiple skill sets that people can use coming into fintech, i.e. you don't need to code? Because that's something I always tell people, you don't need to code to be in fintech. What's your thoughts on that?
I don't think you do. I've always been tech curious, so sit at home and play around with sorting out things for my kids or looking at so I've always been quite tech conscious. In terms of coding, I've got, I know how to use Excel. I can do some basic VBA work that just comes up from, working on a trading floor. I don't think you do. I think you just want to have an appreciation of quite what these things mean. And to me, it's more about like how things connect. So not the technical details of how things connect, but conceptually, like, if we're using a chat platform, what is that chat platform doing? And why is it sending a message to them? And does it go somewhere else? And if we're trying to pull data from somewhere, why could it be tricky to pull something from one database and put it into a spreadsheet where there's already something else going on? So I really don't think you need to code. I think some of the stuff I did around like product development, I was just giving the trading floor view. And then I may be on a few meetings where I saw the sort of project management side of tech development. And that was obviously helpful because on a trading desk, you just basically say, this is what I want. Here, this is the blurb. Do these things for me. And then there's some guys that have to go away and write a plan for what they need to do and write the specs and the requirements and then like delivery times. So that was quite helpful in seeing how, they manage that side of things. And I've got a good friend who works in sort of IT project management, and he talks about Scrum and Agile and all these things that you probably don't realize. So I think just having an appreciation of those is all you really need. And I don't know, given what I said before about banks and legacy IT, if you're just aware of what else is going on in tech, not in banking, those ideas are coming across and vice versa, right? So I just, it's, for me, I've just always wanted to know a bit about what's going on and, these new things that occur. So, and it's been very good for me in that the products and the projects I've been looking at are for people that I know and could have been and the job I did. So it's easy for me to see how they're applied and used, how I would suggest they change. And then because I understand that side of things, getting an appreciation of what happens behind on the tech side has been a lot easier. There's still some calls where, I really don't know quite what's going on and I try and think about it and do a bit of research, or where there's other use cases, I'm just not quite sure what the rationale behind it is. It's harder to think about what the tech side means, but that just sort of comes with a bit of experience. But no, I think you would know by the time you're uni or postgrad if you're going to be a coder or developer. There's nothing wrong with realizing you're not going to be one, but sort of knowing how these things sort of are put together and work. If you've got that, and just empathy is probably quite a good word to make sure you can see what's going on.
So to finish off then, if you were a grad starting off your career now, knowing what you know with your experience in financial markets, and now also seeing kind of the explosive potential of fintech and what it can become, and ultimately everything's becoming fintech, what would you do now?
So I wouldn't go into coding because I don't think it's for me. I wouldn't do. I know that that wouldn't be for me. I'm hugely interested in the amount of data that's available and what you do with it. So I think there's a massive opportunity for some sort of stats combined with psychology, combined with social science, combined with sociology, because in financial markets, you're using data to predict things and to link things together. But in the sort of tech world and fintech world, other things around, hedge funds use satellites to check car park lots of stores. Like, that's a brilliant idea. There must be so many ideas like that with data that is readily available or nearly readily available that you can use. So I would be doing something pretty broad, but sort of just trying to keep tech type topics as 20% of it. So for me, again, it's sort of something business school related, or just something like that. I think the people who are going to be the most valuable are the ones that can connect tech with real life situations and being able to sell stuff and market stuff. it's that sort of insight that I think is going to be the most valuable bit, because the coding and the coding type side of it is only going to get harder as, you know, computers develop and everything becomes so, unless you know you're that way, the real value is going to be in how you use that side of things to implement what you want to do, and to, you know, work out, okay, well, I don't need to understand how all these things work, but I know that if someone tells me it can do this type of thing, how can I use that to go and, you know, sell this product or create a new product or sell something new to banks or solve some problem in the NHS, or, you know, it's going to be the people in between which means I don't think, I mean, you could, if you go into computer science or coding, you might get some of that experience, but it might be quite limiting. But I think you generally probably know by the time you're sort of uni age whether you're going to be, you know, on that side of things or not. And I think as well, you know, when I started, it was very much like, get into this. You know, banking will give you a good grounding. Accountancy was the thing to do, really, if you wanted to open up every opportunity, because it gave you that broad background. So I think the broad background and not tying yourself down is something that's, one, probably younger people are more open to now, whereas I was like, let's get a job, could be my job for life. So whereas now, you know, it doesn't really have to be. And that there is definitely value in doing a few different things.
Great. Thanks a lot, Neil. So I think from your perspective, your secret to success so far has been a combination of things, from social skills, through being confident, through networking, understanding things, always be learning, and obviously keeping an eye on technology and keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going and not necessarily needing to code. So to wrap up, thank you very much, Neil Weatherall.